a human rights mission for Ukraine. And Lorent Saleh, the Sakharov Prize winner in 2017, is behind this initiative. And this initiative has taken Lorent Saleh to Warsaw over the past few weeks and to the Polish border with Belarus and Ukraine. He was joined by a team of international volunteer experts. And Lorent wanted to hear people's stories. He wanted to be a witness to the victims of the conflict. And he also wanted to provide health and logistical support in hosting refugees and providing support to people who are fleeing the conflict. But above all, he wanted to communicate the compromise of the Sakharov community and the compromise of the European Parliament with regard to the people of Ukraine. And this is one of the European Parliament's most distinctive prizes, the Sakharov Prize. And we've got a Sakharov Prize laureate from Venezuela. And that means that this show of solidarity is even more significant, given the notorious support of Nicolás Maduro's regime to Russia in this horrible war. And the Sakharov laureates from the democratic opposition in Belarus are also fiercely opposed to the attack on Ukraine. And indeed, Alexei Navalny, from his prison cell, is encouraging his fellow Russians to stand up against this unfair war. Lorent Saleh was due to carry out a mission to Ukraine with Oleg Sentsov. The aim was to put the spotlight on Ukrainian political prisoners in Crimea and Donbass. But, of course, when Russia invaded, everything changed. And Oleg Sentsov enlisted in the land army in order to protect his country. And that meant that he laid down his camera as a film director and took up arms to carry out his struggle. Lorent is still in Poland, and we're now going to have a live connection to him so that he can tell us about his experience, his observations during this mission. He's also put together a brief video. So we're going to start off with the video, and then I shall give the floor to Lorent, who is connected remotely. So let's put the video on, and we will then have a chance to connect with Lorent. Over to you.
Diego and Andres are helping with unloading things that came for Ukrainian refugees. We are next.
Thanks to many people's efforts, we've made it to Spain, more than 3,000 kilometers away from the Ukrainian borders, and many Ukrainian families have now found shelter and safety. In a few days' time, we will travel back with more aid, and we will come back once again with more families. Lorent, and it's a great honor for me to be here with you, standing shoulder to shoulder with the people whom we admire greatly.
Nie mówię po polsku, ale nazywam się Lorent. Jest to dla mnie zaszczyt, żeby być tutaj z wami.
Okay. Gracias.
Thank you very much indeed for this video, Lorent. Welcome to the European Parliament, to this mini plenary session that we are holding here in Brussels. Welcome to you online, and we're ready to listen to you, to hear your account of what you've experienced in the recent days. So I suggest that you take the floor for maybe 6-7 minutes, and then we have enough time for a conversation and a debate. I do hope you can hear me. Yes, we can. Honourable members, thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you. First of all, my thanks to the European Parliament for the Sakharov Network in Brussels for placing their trust in this mission and for their support. My thanks in particular to the NGOs that have supported us. The Diálogo Abierto NGO, which has been very much following the latest developments in Poland and made our work possible. So the situation in Ukraine is of great concern to us. Putin's encroaching into Ukrainian territory was not something that came as a surprise. It was something we expected to happen because of the aggression of Vladimir Putin. Didn't begin in February of this year. It, in fact, began in 2014. So one of the reasons why today Europe and the world has left Shevtov as a Sakharov Prize laureate is precisely because he defended democracy and freedom in his country. This initiative began at the start of the year. We had wanted to organize a human rights mission on Ukrainian soil just a few weeks before Vladimir Putin launched his attack. And the plan had been to focus on political prisoners, people being held by Putin's forces both in Russia and in Ukraine. And that was the original focus. Now, sadly, the context changed, and there were some stumbling blocks along the way. What we were able to do was to move to Poland and launch the mission anyway. In Warsaw, we were able to immediately contact a number of different NGOs and associations that were already active in Poland, but also in Ukraine. And from day one, we were able to get a clear picture of the urgent and immediate needs. And we were able to focus on two aspects of our work, first of all. So support to victims on the one hand, refugees, and secondly, the dealing with the impact of that in Europe, as it's felt in Europe. So what was the initiative and what was the purpose? First of all, to document, to analyze, and to manage the evidence of any criminal activities committed by Putin's regime in Ukraine. So making a record that we would keep and taking down these statements so that they could be submitted to the ICC at a later stage. That was the work we were doing together with lawyers and prosecutors from the ICC. And we, in fact, received a positive reply from the ICC with regard to this mission purpose. So the idea was to work hand in hand with the ICC and to gather the type of evidence and proof and witness statements to establish clearly that Putin, in fact, is committing war crimes in Ukraine. And the second aim was, of course, to support, provide humanitarian aid and support to the refugees and the people on the ground. Now, I can say it's been a very difficult time, that we've had very emotional times, and war is the worst of anything we can undergo. And what we were seeing was the dramatic impact it was having on children, and the humanitarian work, of course, has had to focus on looking after young children and babies who were compelled to leave their countries and sometimes leave their fathers, and this was emotionally a very, very tough mission. And we were working also on the Belarusian border, even though it hadn't originally been planned that way. So halfway through the mission, there was a citizens' protest bringing together Belarusians, Ukrainians and Polish people at the Belarusian border. The idea was that they were noticing that there was still quite a lot of traffic across the border, and there was every reason to believe that this was a supply route for Russia to try and supply its forces through the Polish border point. And so there were citizens who were protesting against this. They stood up to this, and I think it's something that needs to be investigated. We need to understand what types of goods, what types of materials are in fact being loaded onto trucks in Germany going through Belarus to Russia. That's something we need to understand. And this is extremely important work for the Sakharov team. Now, we've visited a number of refugee centres and support centres in Warsaw, but also in the border area. We spoke with local authorities, we spoke with NGOs and civil society organizations, but also private companies that are active there. We were trying to coordinate with these people. It's in fact a first for us to be doing this kind of work, and we were able to team up with other volunteers who very generously came to join us and represented the spirit, lived out the spirit of Andrei Sakharov, which is, I think, a spirit that is very much alive right now. And the Sakharov legacy is extremely important, and it is very timely now in this, against this backdrop of a resistance and struggle for democracy. I think there's a lot of opportunities now for us to support the people of Ukraine. One of the meetings that I felt was particularly important was held with the Vice President of the Polish Congress. She's been carrying out documentation work, noting down, taking records of criminal activities carried out by the Putin regime since 2014. So at the Polish Congress meeting, we were able to exchange information and go through, make an inventory of events and criminal events that we've been able to log, but also establish and identify patterns of behavior that we were able to identify. So we then thought about organizing a cooperation program, bringing together NGOs with support from the European Parliament, the Polish Parliament, and tying in with universities or global campus, so that we would have a permanent team on the ground making records, taking down statements, so that we can ensure that in the future justice will be served. The work that is being done with victims, standing by their side, supporting these people is absolutely necessary. The Sakharov community and the European Parliament must be there, needs to be standing alongside victims, supporting them, giving them a voice, so that they can speak up about the unfortunate events they've had to live through. Now, there's a huge amount still left to be done on humanitarian support and assistance, but also an enormous amount of work in terms of justice. We are drawing up a detailed report, and that report will bring together all of the key points that we think need to be actioned right now. Let me say, once again, the Sakharov Prize needs to be rolled out. Olive Sistov is actually facing, he's joined the armed struggle. Alexei Navalny is in prison, in a Russian prison, and his Belarusian colleagues are doing their political work to denounce this aggression from Vladimir Putin, not directed solely against Ukraine, but all of Europe. It's an aggression on freedom and democracy, ultimately. And as a Sakharov laureate from Venezuela, I couldn't stand by and watch on. Belarusians, Cubans, we're all ultimately victims of Vladimir Putin. I was in Venezuela and I suffered torture. And I was held in a center that received training and orders from Russia. So it felt very important for us to be present. We have volunteers from our mission who are moving refugees away from the Polish border to locations in Spain to provide these people with shelter, with homes, people who are fleeing war. Right now, we have colleagues in Ukraine, in in Ukrainian territory, gathering information, documenting what's happening right now. It's extremely risky work, and we've had support from Open Dialogo. But I must say, these volunteer groups are suffering attacks. Despite the fact that they're civilians, they're civilian units, they still have been targeted. So I'm in touch with my colleagues who are gathering information, who are interviewing victims, who are working with the psychologists who support refugees. I think it would be useful for the European Parliament and the Sakharov community in particular to open up a space so that it's not just the laureates and the MEPs who can come together to work, but also that we can involve young people, ordinary citizens who wish to do their bit, who want to join forces with the Sakharov community in Poland and in Ukraine. Honourable members, I would urge you to lend us your support in the work we're doing. We've had an extremely intensive week of work. We're all exhausted, but we are determined and committed to continuing this work, and we must be there to continue this work. The welcome that we received from these people when we arrived at the various places, the various locations, was absolutely heartwarming. Many people hadn't heard of the Sakharov community's work. They weren't aware of us and our teams. So this mission, I think, has raised the profile of the European Parliament and its efforts, and the work it's doing to defend democracy the world over. So, as I say, there's a huge amount of work left to be done. So please, let us continue this work. We need to ensure that the people of Ukraine are not left alone, and that they're not only hearing press statements and communiques, that they feel genuine human support for their cause from people and the teams that are on the ground who are working around the clock to provide assistance and defend human rights and democracy. Once again, allow me to thank all the teams in Brussels who have been online with us and have provided support from a distance, and I extend my greetings to the Sakharov colleagues who are scattered around the world and who are following this work, and everyone is doing what they can to defend democracy and to defend freedoms. The freedoms that not only the people of Ukraine must enjoy, but the entire world must enjoy. So thank you very much for this opportunity. There's a lot that could be said and discussed, but I just wanted to share my general experiences of the last few days. Of course, it's extremely tough for me to be far away from my family, but you know, what I'm seeing here is women and children fleeing from war, and I feel I need to be by their side. These are the men stay to fight and defend their countries. So I'm now, of course, ready to take your questions, to respond to any comments that you wish to make. Thank you.
Gracias a ti, Lorent.
Thank you very much, Lorent Saleh, Sakharov Laureate 2017, and you've underscored not just the symbolic importance of this, but you've also said a great deal about the importance of the Sakharov Prize and the European Parliament's compromise with fighting for freedom, in particular freedom of speech. Thank you very much for what you've shared with us here today. Thank you for your depth of feeling. And we're joined here in the room today by the chairperson of the Subcommittee on Human Rights, who is strongly committed to everything surrounding the Sakharov Prize. And the Sakharov Prize is a a really important prize, and I'd like to begin with some questions before I give the floor to Maria Arena in order for you to be able to take the floor and make any comments you may have. Over the past few days, what we've seen is that the press which sometimes seems to disregard the European Parliament, in fact even seems to disregard European decision-making as a whole, that press has, however, had a special focus on us. And expectations are very high indeed. There are high expectations around the meetings taking place in Brussels. The European Council is meeting. The leaders are meeting, heads of state and government. Then there's also a NATO summit, integrating 30 Western states. Most of them are EU member states, but there are members of the EU that are not NATO members. And there are NATO member states that are not members of the EU, including, of course, the United States and Canada. So we've got that special focus from the press. And there's an expectation there, an expectation of a message that will bolster the commitment to the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. There's an expectation of support for the Ukrainian armed forces. These forces that are showing heroic resistance, and what's more, effective resistance against Russia's power, which we thought was uncontested and uncontestable. And the Russian army is having a very difficult time of it. It's feeling very fatigued and having a very difficult time moving forward because Ukraine's territory is being firmly defended by the Ukrainians. There is protection of their land against an outside aggressor. And so, of course, that is a factor in this debate, the military aspect, military operations. And there have been efforts made towards solidarity in the EU, and that's the humanitarian assistance that's been provided to the millions of people who've been displaced over a scant 4 weeks. It's almost 4 million people, that's the number. 4 million people are here in the EU, and they've lost everything, but they're here. And women and children are there, as you said, Lorent. The vast majority of these people are women and children, since, of course, there's a martial law, which means that most men in the population have to enlist. But for the first time, the EU has activated a law, triggered a law, ensuring that these people will bypass our regulations, which often are very rigorous, the regulations that apply to people seeking refuge and asylum in the EU. And this applies to work permits and residence permits. So it's also got an impact on social services, which are linked to employment in Europe. It means that there's easier access for these people. These millions of people are able to move freely throughout the Union as a consequence of that change in the law. So I'd like to ask you, Lorent, you've been in touch now with these displaced people, and what's your impression? What hopes do they have for the next few years? What's their take on the future? Will they be going home to Ukraine as soon as possible? Will they be seeking out friends, seeking out relatives from Ukraine who were already in the EU before this conflict began? And there's a very sensitive issue as well. The issue of human trafficking mafias, human trafficking rings. These unscrupulous rings have decided to take advantage of the situation. They feel that this is a business opportunity. There's the matter of sexual exploitation, of exploitation for forced work, exploiting very vulnerable people, women and children. Those human trafficking rings are already in place and up and running on the border between Poland and Ukraine, and on the border with Hungary as well. And I'd like to hear from you on this, Lorent. Have you been able, in your contact with these people, to hear about this kind of thing? Is it something that you've observed yourself? Have you heard from people about how they feel about this? These people are in such a vulnerable position. what this means for these people is that they have to be very careful when it comes to the people they place their trust in. They've got to watch every move. And we'd like to thank you for your commitment to human rights. And we'd like to hear from you. What are you seeing on the ground? How are people feeling? These displaced people who have had to flee from this unjust war. Now, before I hand back over to Lorent and Maria, would you like to take the floor? Thank you very much, Juan Fernando.
To thank Lorent Saleh for the words that we received today from him as Sakharov Prize, being really committed for democracy and human rights, not only for his country, but also has a network of human rights in the world. So thank you, Lorent, for what you are doing. You said that the situation in Ukraine was perhaps known since 2014, when Russia decided to invade Crimea. And we have had this Sakharov Prize to stand up for fighting for the territories for Ukraine. But in the same time, we can say, what have we done during this period from 2014 and today? It is sometimes difficult to understand how we can't put human rights and international law as a first priority of our foreign policies in Europe. And perhaps if we had taken appropriate measures at this time, it would have been possible to avoid what we are living today in the country. And still now we are continuing to put a question on how it is possible to have sanctions against fossil fuel in Russia, because we have big companies that are really not willing to do so. I take the example of Total not willing to stop buying gas in Russia, for example, even if people are losing their life in Ukraine. So it is really something that we have to think about in our external policy at the European side, saying that we need to put democracy, human rights, and respect of international law at the first priority of what we are doing in the foreign policy. I wanted to ask you two questions. You said that in your meetings that you have had in Poland, but also with NGOs working in Ukraine, you are collecting evidence for violation of human rights in the country, grave violation of human rights in the country. And we were 2 days before in the International Humanitarian Law Forum. I was with the Secretary General of UN for Human Rights, and she said that what is really important is, of course, being there, but having a strong methodology for collecting evidence on the ground. Because in this situation, we have to guarantee that we are totally neutral on collecting these evidences. And so have you been confronted to this situation, and you feel that you have all the training needed for collecting this information, and how can we help people being there to have this methodology and to be sure that these evidences can be used in the future to characterize this crime as grave violation of human rights being acceptable by the International Court? This is my first question, and so to understand how it is possible to help people on the ground to have this methodology. The second one is we have been really united for solidarity for Ukrainian people in Ukraine and outside Ukraine, people fleeing this terrible war. we also notice that even in Europe, and I must say in Europe, this solidarity has been a little bit, I don't know how to say that, but in a diplomatic way, there have been some discrimination for this solidarity. And we know that there are people living in Ukraine and not being Ukrainian. For example, African students not being able to be accepted in our country as solidarity. Have you seen this kind of discrimination? Because it is also important for us to guarantee that protection is for everybody. We can't accept that protection is for some people and not for the other people. So it is really important also when we are speaking about values that we are really implementing these values in the same way for everybody. So can you tell us if you saw this kind of discrimination? If yes, if it's possible to work on this and to perhaps to help people having these access. Thank you.
Any other colleague willing to raise a hand, connected online? Show your yellow hand on the screen so that I may notice you if you are there. If it's not the case, si no es así, te escuchamos para tu...
We are ready to listen to your comments then, Lorent Saleh. You can respond to the points that have been raised by myself and by my colleague. You, in fact, touched upon a point that is very close to my heart. I love my wife dearly and I have 2 young children. And every time I see these women, defenseless women, I see her. These women with a suitcase in hand with their children, babies in their arms, extremely vulnerable. I cannot help but to get a flash of an image of my own wife and children fleeing. And where would they go? I don't know. And these people are so fragile. They are so defenseless. They speak no other language. They don't know anything outside of Ukraine. I read recently an account from someone who was providing telephone assistance from Brussels, and that person was saying that they were very worried about trafficking organizations becoming involved. Interpol already issued an alert on this, and I believe the risk is real. It's a latent risk. It's not an actually happening to my knowledge yet. So I do believe that it's there. It's hiding. It's lurking somewhere, ready to pounce. And I think we have to be keeping a very close eye. We have to be extremely vigilant. And what happens? Well, people who are driving families are simply drivers. I mean, that they're professional drivers. They're male quite often, and then that will make people feel nervous when it comes to the centre and their coordinators, the mediators, and the families themselves who are getting transport in this way. So in all of these centres, what we do is we try to register and take and really scrutinize all the offers of help that come in from people for transport, and so that we can protect the refugees. How effective is this necessarily? Well, it's a first for us. It's something that we've not seen before. So are there weak points? Yes. Are there grey areas? Perhaps. Are there any dark corners that we still need to shed light on? And is there a space for the mafia to active? So let me repeat once again, I don't think there's any evidence of a specific case yet or any kind of actual problems, or these cases may be isolated, but I really am worried, and in fact I raised this point with the Zaharov office, and it's a very sensitive point, and I spoke with all the coordinators in the center to make them aware of it. I made the Polish centers aware of it, and the police forces in the border area were made aware as well. Right now, most the response has been enormous. No person has spent more than 3 days in any kind of holding or reception center, which means that the problems that you normally see in these centers are not occurring this time because of how swiftly and smoothly things are moving. The real problems that when you hear from people about is that they don't know what's going to happen in the long run. They don't have a long-term perspective. So these people are going to stay with another family, a family that perhaps won't be able to provide long-term help. So the European Parliament should help to coordinate with other organizations so that we ensure that all these families are safe. We are talking about women and children who are in extremely vulnerable situations. And I think it would be right and proper that as part of the work that we do, we also provide some follow-up work, and that we have a handful of people who specifically keep an eye on this aspect. The potential risk of mafia activity in this context. Now, to respond to Ms. Arena and the point that she raised, thank you very much for your comments. You've always been a champion of the work that we've done in the Zaharov network, so thank you. When this invasion began into Ukrainian territory by Putin's forces, we all saw things unfolding in real time, if I can put it this way. We saw high-definition video, audio content, just telling the whole world what was going on. And I think it's been a very useful thing to be able to get a sense of just the scale of this invasion, and to get the information we needed for politicians, but also for other organizations, and to also to generate an empathic response amongst the international community. But in legal terms, I think most of the material that we have seen, in fact, provides very good, does not necessarily meet the criteria you would need in a courtroom. So that's what our work is all about. We try to document things in a way and gather evidence, gather information in a rigorous way, in a way that is watertight, so that we can submit this. And in fact, we getting support from Mr. Gutierrez's lawyers, legal team, and the legal team who work in the ICC. So we have our own legal advisors, internal advisors, but then we're getting extra external support so that we can ensure that our volunteers and independent people and others, in fact, are informed about the format of their statements, the format of their contribution, so that it will hold up in court. And Global Campus is also working on this. And it's in fact providing information to people on the ground. So training and information work, telling people how they should gather information, what type of information and proof they can gather, the technical requirements that would be needed for something to be legally valid. So we have specialists helping us to do this work, and we do need the work to continue in terms of our investigative work, but also the educational work that we're doing so that we can inform the local population about how they need to gather information. Things have unfolded so quickly, so rapidly, that we've had to really learn on the ground. And we've had to revise and redefine our objectives. Well, initially, we want to gather all the statements, all the witness accounts, and we wanted to work very quickly. We didn't want to miss out. We really wanted to tap into the energy and the momentum that we were seeing. But then the reality hit. And people are undergoing traumatic situations. So we had to be very tactful, respectful, and understanding of the people and what they've gone through. I am a victim myself. I know how difficult it is when the victim isn't being given due care and respect. So on the ground, in fact, we understood that we couldn't work as fast as we had hoped to initially, and that people must be given time, and that there are different stages to the work that we're doing, and that we need to work hand in hand with the psychologists and psychiatrists who are supporting victims, so that we're taking advice from the psychologists as well.
Algunos lo saben.
Now, with regard to the discrimination that you mentioned, well, some of you may know that my family is from Palestine. They fled Palestine. I am Venezuelan. So we understand. We've been through what it means to flee your country and to be faced with the discrimination. And this has happened to me and my family in several different parts of the world. And something that really rang a warning bell was what we were hearing about possible discrimination at the border. Discrimination against people who weren't Ukrainian, people who, because of their ethnicity, were facing discrimination, people who were being marginalized. And this had to do not only with entering Europe, it also had to do with the kind of assistance that they were being provided with or not. So just picture that. It's obviously a very sensitive issue. That was really one of the first things that we wanted to change and take a close look at. Up until now, I don't have any material proof that this is happening. This is based on a conversation that I had with the Vice President of the Polish Congress. Now, I'm a human rights defender, and I have an understanding of the political situation. Poland is facing a complex political situation when it comes to human rights defenders and the government. It's tricky, and my colleagues working with me here in Poland are facing court cases because of their work to defend human rights. But there's something that needs to be acknowledged, something I want to say to all of you. In record time, and it's surprising, so I think it's something that ought to be recognized. This process has happened in record time. It's given us ideas about how to go about things in other humanitarian crises, because the Polish administration has evolved and constantly adapted to the situation. It's managed to do away with hurdles in order to ensure that people could be attended to without discrimination very swiftly. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no discrimination. We need to keep working on that. That's why I think it's so important to be there on the ground permanently. Because I'm not saying that this type of discrimination isn't taking place. Just to give you an example, if you look at healthcare, we've got veterinarians here on the ground at the border to ensure that there's care provided for the pets that the Ukrainians have brought along, ensuring that the pets were vaccinated, that they had the chips they needed so that the pets wouldn't be left behind on the other side of the border. It's to ensure that everyone's got the right papers, including the pets. Just to ensure that everything was in order from a papers point of view, to make sure that everyone had access to education and other services. I'm saying this because I've been through other humanitarian crises, and just looking at the way things have happened here, if you look at the NGOs and the private sector providing assistance on the ground, and if you look at the way the Polish state has responded to the crisis, well, frankly, their work has been exemplary, and in fact, overwhelmingly so. And of course, there are mixed feelings around that. I wish that it wasn't just the Ukrainians receiving this kind of care. I wish that it was everyone fleeing their countries, anywhere in the world, receiving this kind of support. But I try to stay positive. I'm trying to be optimistic. What we're seeing now, no matter how tragic, is also in some kind of way setting a milestone. It's a milestone in an example of how to provide support to people who are having to flee their countries, and in how to express solidarity. Actually, this is a lesson that Poland and the Polish government is learning. It's a lesson to the European Union. It's a lesson to the world. And in particular, it's a lesson to many, many politicians who were hostile to migrants. So that's why I try to stay positive, just to ensure that I can stay whole. It's my view that there's a lot that needs to be taken into account. We've got an example of the way care is being provided here. Just looking at the rollout of efforts from NGOs working in tandem with the private sector, working with citizens. What you've got there is something that's astounding. It's all happened so swiftly, and the efforts have been huge. In fact, they've overridden anything that the national and local authorities could have done. It's more than the institutional responses. And I think that that's something that ought to be kept in mind and set as an example. Everything's happened so swiftly, in fact, that it's about taking action now, but also looking at what's going to happen in the mid and long term. Any Ukrainian you talk to has faith that they'll be able to go home soon. And there are no guarantees that this conflict will end anytime soon. This is a first step in providing assistance to refugees, and I feel that it's been a success. But it may turn out to be extremely tricky if there's not a focus on how to deal with this in the mid and long term. Now, the Honourable Member Maria Arena was talking about a reluctance to cut ties with Vladimir Putin's regime. Well, yes, that's the way it is in some cases. There's a fight here, a fight against an oppressive regime like Putin's regime, but it's also a fight against big corporations, a fight against those attitudes and the selfishness of many big corporations. If you look at what's happening on the border with Belarus, actually it was very painful to witness. I'm not as young as I used to be, and that means that I'm a little bit more cautious in what I say. But there were businessmen bothering the police, telling them to get rid of the protesters, to ensure that they could keep providing supplies to Russia across the border, to keep doing business with Russia. So here's my view. The European Parliament needs to put a special focus on implementing those sanctions effectively. In other situations, there have been sanctions too. And those sanctions are announced, they're set out, they're adopted in a united fashion. But actually what ends up happening when it comes to the implementation is that these sanctions are ignored. There are loopholes, they're easy to get around. And this has got to do with fighting back against corporations, fighting back against capital, which have no respect for human life. And they don't care to do so. But we need to ensure that these corporations do toe the line, that they do respect human rights. But I very much hope that I'll be able to go back to the border and keep monitoring this.
Lorent Saleh, te agradecemos.
Lorent Saleh, we thank you for your very eloquent and also your emotional contribution. We have run over the allocated time for our meeting today, but we wish to express our thanks to you for everything that you've said, and I just wanted you to rest assured that the European Parliament will be doing everything within its powers to support prevention, but also coordination and the work that's being done. We are showing not only solidarity in symbolic public terms, but also in private and practical ways. We are providing support through volunteer work and supporting individual initiatives of this type. There needs to be coordination, of course, between the different bodies that are active, and that's what you were asking for. Also, I want to express a message of calm and reassurance to you. The European Parliament has always focused on human rights. So the Ukrainians fleeing from conflict, but all people fleeing conflict have a right to protection in Europe in accordance with their rights and freedoms. And I understand that there's a contrast being visible between the support received by Ukrainians and others fleeing conflict and difficult situations, who are pushed aside and who are receive a hostile welcome. And this really is in contrast with what we're seeing on the Ukrainian border, where people receive aid and assistance. So I thank you, and we move on to the next part of our program today of the Ukrainian Solidarity Days, which is being organized in the margins of the mini plenary session here in Brussels. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again, and I wish you success with your mission.